at a crossroads right now. Are we going to take the Reagan approach, the hopeful, optimistic approach, the approach that says that you come to our country legally, you pursue your dreams with a vengeance, you create opportunities for all of us, or the Donald Trump approach, the approach that says that everything is bad, that everything's coming to an end?
Jeb Bush and Donald Trump, during last night's debate, sparring over immigration. During that exchange, you just heard the former Florida governor say that he was going to take the Ronald Reagan approach. It was one of several times GOP candidates mentioned the Gipper by name. Our unofficial account, 23 mentions. So with the debate at the Reagan Library, how much of a role did our 40th president play in last night's debate? For more on this, via Skype from Simi Valley, California, we're joined by the president of Shirley and Banister Public Affairs, Craig Shirley. Craig is also the author of the soon-to-be-released book, Last Act, The Final Years and Emerging Legacy of Ronald Reagan. So, Craig, in the Reagan Library, the candidates basically doubled the mentions of Reagan. You told us we would hear about Reagan. Was he employed accurately or almost in mythical fashion last night?
I think that for the most part, JD, he was employed authentically. There were some flights of fancy as far as Reagan goes, but I thought that most of the candidates, especially Mike Huckabee and Chris Christie and Carly Fiorina, invoked Reagan very, very well. I was struck by what Mike Huckabee said, Governor Huckabee said, where he admonished the interviewers to stop talking about the candidates and start talking about the American people, and that's exactly what Reagan did. You know, he said in his 1980 acceptance speech in Detroit, he said, "Don't trust me, trust yourself," which is the essence of American conservatism, which is to put its faith and trust in individuals, not in any state or bureaucracy or government agency. So I thought it was very well. I think that they were probably limited because the questioning, I was surprised that there was only one question about the legacy of Ronald Reagan, and it came toward the end. You know, there they were at the Reagan Library. Reagan is the iconic, dominant figure who looms even larger today than he did when he left office over the Republican Party, and yet they only saw fit to ask one question. You know, they could have asked, are you a Reagan Republican? What is a Reagan Republican? Does Reagan Republicanism apply to 21st century politics? There were a lot of ways in which they could have approached Reagan, but that's, you know, that was the fault of CNN.
Well, let me ask you this. We saw the video involving Jeb Bush and Donald Trump. Was Jeb's interpretation of the Reagan position on immigration accurate? Because I remember paraphrasing a Reagan observation, a nation without borders will cease being a nation.
Right, and you are exactly right. Reagan wasn't Pollyannish about the borders. He was very clear about the borders. You know, everybody points to the '86 Simpson-Mazzoli Act. A number of things you have to take into consideration. One, it was at the height of the Cold War. Reagan was not going to hand Gorbachev a PR bonanza by forcibly evicting 300,000 to 500,000 people, A. B is a lot of those people who were here were political refugees, not economic refugees. They'd come from Cuba, they'd come from Nicaragua, they'd come from El Salvador, they'd come from other communist-dominated countries. So they came here for political purposes, not for economic purposes. That's completely different today from the illegal immigrant. But you're absolutely right. He said that a nation without borders ceases to be a nation. He was, and don't forget, on Simpson-Mazzoli, which was never enforced under the Bush administration, those illegals who were here had to learn English, they had to pay a penalty, they had to sign up for military service, for community service and community service. It also effectively closed the border to illegal immigration. So he was much more hard-lined on it than he is portrayed, falsely I might add, under Simpson-Mazzoli.
Let us turn to last night's debate. I'm interested in your assessment. The big winner and the big loser last night.
I would say conventional wisdom in this case is right. I would say Carly Fiorina was the big winner, followed closely by, I thought Chris Christie did rather well. I thought Mike Huckabee did rather well. He was funny and poignant at times. Donald Trump probably didn't win, but he didn't lose either. The rest, and Scott Walker had some very, very good moments. When unfortunately, he was only asked 3 questions by CNN. But he made the most of it, and he did very well. The rest, I would say, was a status quo. It was kind of a holding pattern. Marco Rubio had some moments. Rand Paul had a moment or two. But my guess is that this is going to be a kind of a status quo debate, and that, with the exception of Carly Fiorina, who clearly surged ahead as of last night.
Well, let me ask you this: anybody turn into the sleeper candidate who did well? Anyone out there who didn't get attention, in addition to Carly, we should be looking at on down the road here?
Well, I would still say Scott Walker. I don't think Jeb did particularly well. He seemed rather petulant. He tried to, take some advice from Donald Trump and be high energy. But Donald Trump was still evocative of Reagan in that he was constantly challenging the conventional wisdom, constantly challenging the status quo, which is very much the essence of Reaganism. So I would say that, with the exception of Fiorina, it was probably a status quo debate. I don't think there's any, and maybe, like I said, Christie came out ahead better than was expected.
Big loser last night. Was it Jeb or Dr. Ben Carson seemed to be very low energy? We got about 30 seconds.
Yeah, I would say the big losers last night were Ben Carson and Jeb Bush. Jeb didn't distinguish himself except once where he defended his brother and the audience applauded. But Republicans tend to be polite to anybody. If he had invoked Dwight Eisenhower, they would have applauded warmly also. But he didn't particularly distinguish himself. And Ben Carson seemed very much to fade into the background. So if anybody came out as the big losers, I would agree with you. I would say it's Ben Carson and Jeb Bush.
And we will have to leave it there. Craig, Shirley, as always, you have our thanks. We'll be back.